2:19 tells us, "But Mary treasured up all these things, pondering them in her heart." The Gospel of Luke tells the story of the first Christmas, the birth of Jesus, the long-awaited Messiah. And the setting is a lowly stable where Mary and Joseph were led because there was no room in the inn. And Mary gave birth to her son in that humble manger, and after a long journey to the city of Bethlehem on the back of a donkey. And soon after Jesus' birth, they were visited by shepherds and wise men who stood watch and who brought them gifts. And they'd been notified by a heavenly host of angels that Jesus had been born, and they had traveled miles to visit, led by a bright star in the sky. The significance of this is that it was the common people, Mary and Joseph, who God chose to parent his son. And it was the less fortunate, the outliers of society, who God selected to be in the inner circle to witness his birth. And it was a meager and modest environment that God selected to be the birthplace of the Savior of the world. And I can't even begin to imagine all that Mary pondered in her heart that night. Very deeply, I'm sure. Maybe she pondered, why me, God? This is not what I had planned for my life. Or maybe she pondered, am I really adequate to be the mother of this special baby? And I'm sure she wondered why God had chosen to allow her to give birth out of wedlock, and how unfair and hurtful it was to have to endure shame and disgrace throughout her pregnancy the way that she did. And she probably pondered why God allowed her to give birth to his son in an humble manger, in a lowly stable, in such environment, an inconvenient and uncomfortable environment and surroundings. And I'm sure she pondered the timing of all of it, that she had to make this long trip with Joseph back to Bethlehem to pay taxes, of all things, on the back of a donkey while she was 9 months pregnant. And she surely pondered the presence of the shepherds and the wise men and the angels. That's a kind of a crowd that you wouldn't expect, and no doubt that was a little overwhelming. And the fact that a whole company of angels visited the shepherds to notify them of Jesus' birth instead of announcing it at a palace or a castle or in the city, no doubt she pondered that, gosh, God's ways really are not our ways. And not only that night, but many nights after, I am sure that Mary pondered that what her family and friends viewed as her most disgraceful moment was actually God's greatest and most beautiful act of grace and love to her personally and to all the world. And just as Mary pondered that Christmas night, may we ponder these things deeply in our hearts too. God, what are you up to in my heart and in my life? And what story of love and grace are you writing, even when in what seems like the hardest, most disappointing, and even the most disgraceful moments? And how are you loving and providing for and using my life to glorify you in ways that are much higher than my ways? Friends, though we don't always understand why, in spite of the situations often not making sense, or the details of the story not matching ours, or what we would have chosen, like Mary, we too can treasure all that God is doing in our lives. Because this we can know for sure, that in spite of all of the circumstances that are out of our control, and all of the specifics that we want to change or would change, and all of the doubts and the fears and the questions in the midst of the uncertainty that we feel, that God is trustworthy with our hearts and our stories. God sees you, he knows you, and he chooses you. And he loves to transform what we may view as our most disappointing, discouraging, or defeating moments in those that we end up, or into those that we end up treasuring the most. He savors taking the most inconvenient and uncomfortable circumstances into the beautiful moments that we end up treasuring and cherishing. He loves to use the most imperfect situations to execute his most perfect plans. And he enjoys using the most ordinary people to give birth to his most extraordinary miracles. This Christmas, treasure up all these things and ponder them in your heart. Merry Christmas, friends.